over notes, chapter 1.3c. So these notes will cover solving equations by clearing fractions and decimals, and that is our learning target for today. Let's see. So anytime I use black, that's your pencil, and when I use a colored pen, that's your colored pen, your Flair pen. So I just want to review some things here. When we're going to look for the lowest common denominator. So it's when we have equations and we have fractions and decimals and we just don't want to deal with them. So these are some of the things that mathematicians do to make their figuring a little bit easier. So when I look for the lowest common denominator, when I look for 3 and 6, hey, where's my drain? Okay, all right. I'm going to write 3 comma 6, and I'm going to look at what goes into 3 and 6 evenly, and I know 3 does, and 3 goes into 3 once, and 3 goes into 6 2 times. If I multiply all of these, my LCD is 6. Sometimes it's super obvious, sometimes it isn't. So if you're okay with the super obvious, use your super obvious method. But for those who like, I don't know. So let's look at 4 and 12. So I'm going to write 4 and 12. And I'm going to see what goes into 4 and 12 evenly. Well, I know 4 does. 4 goes into 4 once, and 4 goes into 12 3 times. Then I take what's left over. It forms that L. Let's see, it forms that L there. And I'm going to multiply all those values, and I get 12. So my LCD is 12. When I have 2 and 5, I have a denominator of 2 and 5. I'm going to look at what goes into 2 and 5. Well, the only thing that goes in is 1. So I'm going to bring down the 2 and the 5. I multiply all of those, and that'll give me my LCD. If you knew from the get-go, no, it's 10, Miss McCarthy, my goodness. You don't have to use this step. This is just a way to, if you can't figure it out. Okay, just a little hint. Okay, so let's look at these fractions here. You're looking for the LCD, the lowest common denominator. When I look at this one, I see my 3 and my 6. So my lowest common denominator, where aren't you staying? Okay, my lowest common denominator is 6. So that means I'm going to multiply everything by 6. So I'm going to use a different color. So if I multiply everything by 6, so using that distributive property, 6 times 2/3 gives me 4. If you're not sure how I did that, I'm going to show that in my sidebar. So here I know 3 goes into 6 twice. I multiply across and I get 4. Or you could do 6 times 2 is 12, divide that by 3, and that also gives me 4. 2 ways of approaching it, does not matter. And I have my x there, okay? And now I'm going to multiply this 6 times that 5 6. Well, that just gives me a 5. And remember I said as long as you do the same thing to both sides, it's all legal. And -1 times 6 is -6. Now I no longer have that fraction to deal with. So I'm now going to isolate my variable, subtract 5 from both sides. And I got, that goes away. And remember, we're going to line up our equal sign. I get 4x equals -11. Divide by 4. And now that little fraction resurfaces. It doesn't always necessarily will give you a fraction answer, but this one did. Okay, so that's one way we could deal with not having to deal with fractions. Okay, so here is, let's look at this one. I'm going to look at all my denominators. I have a 2 and a 5. Well, he's a 5 also, so I don't need to duplicate it. So I know my LCD is 10. So I'm going to multiply everything by 10. Okay. There's a 10 over 1. So I'm going to distribute that 10. 10 times a half is 5. Pencil. 5 plus, and 10 times this guy, well, I know 10 times 2 is 20, divided by 5 is a 4 and has an X. I could use chicken scratch over here, totally fine with that if you want to do it this way. Use your chicken scratch. I'm over here and I get 20 over 5 and that gives me a 4. Okay, and he has an X, so don't forget your X's. And I have 4/5 times a 10. Well, 4 times 10 is 40. So that gives me a 40 over 5. Well, that gives me 8. And now now I have nice clean numbers. I'm going to subtract 5 for both sides. Remember, I'm going to line up those equal signs. And I get 3. This goes away. I have 4x. Divide that by 4. And now I have x is equal to 3/4. So if you don't want to deal with fractions, you're welcome to get rid of them from the beginning, and then they'll resurface. Okay, we talked about briefly the other day on how to get rid of the decimals. So when you're looking at clearing your decimals, we multiply both sides by the lowest power of 10 to make all values a whole number. So if this one here, if I got to move this decimal over 2 places. So that means I have to multiply that by 100. Okay. For every place value it moves over, that's a power of 10. Okay. So here my smallest number is 0.02, 0.12. So if I multiply everything by 100, it will clear my decimals. So I'm going to multiply this by 100, and as long as I do the same thing to both sides, it's all legal. So I'm going to distribute. The 100 times 0.02x gives me a 2x. 100 times 0.4, that moves my decimal over 2 places, that gives me 40. And 0.12 times 100, 0.12, gives me 12. Now I have nice clean numbers and I could solve my equation. Okay, now let's look. I'm not going to work this one out. So let's look at the next one. So again, the whole goal is to clear your fractions. So I'm going to use a different color so you know what I'm using there. So I have negative 2.6, 1.3, negative 1.3. So if I multiply, I just need to move that decimal over once. So I'm going to multiply everything by 10. So let's include that. And we use the distributive property this week. So I'm going to make sure that's where we can apply it. So 10 times this number gives me negative 26x. And 10 times this value gives me a 13. And 10 times this value gives me a negative 13. Now I have very clean numbers. It's all happy. And now I'm going to go what I showed you earlier this week. Okay.